So hello and welcome to VistaTalks, interesting discussions with interesting people from all around the world. I'm your host for today, Simon Hodgkins, and I'm delighted to be joined by Jessica Huie. Jessica is described by Forbes as one of the UK's most influential women on true success. Jessica is a PR powerhouse and a maverick entrepreneur. She was recognized with an MBE for services to entrepreneurship and contribution to diversity. Jessica also has an acclaimed book called Purpose, which was published by Hay House and was named one of the UK's best business books written by women by the Telegraph Newspaper. The Purpose retreats take place twice a year in lovely Jamaica and the UK, and her experience, I know, is sought out broadly, from roundtables at No.10 Downing Street to many boards for Jessica's input. So Jessica, it's lovely to have you on the show. You're very welcome.
It's great to be here.
Very good. You're joining us from Jamaica today, is that correct?
Sunny Montego Bay.
Lovely, beautiful. Well, look, let's move on. I've got a few things I want to ask you. And of course, we have to start. I mentioned there that you have an MBE. So it's not very often we have somebody with an MBE on the show, but I would like you to maybe share some information about your MBE. How did that come about?
Well, at the MBE, so that was 2014 when I received a very exciting letter from the postman letting me know that I was being acknowledged for, as you said, services to entrepreneurship and contribution to diversity in the UK, which was really a result of having become what I describe as an accidental entrepreneur. I was going through this, I was in the middle of a really, successful in terms of society's, what society would deem as successful media career, working as a publicist with many, many high profile superstars and entrepreneurs all around the world, and loving it. It was a crazy existence, for a young woman who grew up in a council estate. I was finding myself traveling around the world on private jets to places I'd never heard of, with currencies I'd never heard of, and it really opened my eyes to new experiences. And I had started to experience what I guess was a bit of a disconnect between my values, which I was becoming more confident in as I was getting into my, becoming older, and I guess the sort of the environment that I was working in, and I don't mean the agency, I mean the wider industry and this whole the beast that is show business, and so during that period, I had gone looking for a greeting card for my little girl who was 7 at the time, and looking for she didn't like her hair. She had beautiful afro hair, and I went looking for a brown skinned princess that would. I was just going to write a note saying, "You're perfect as you are," and that was all it was going to be. It was a lunch break trip to Oxford Street, and discovered that there was nothing in the high street that was representative. All of the princesses were blonde and blue-eyed, and this was sort of 2006, 2007, at a time when representation, the importance of representation and diversity and inclusion really wasn't on the news agenda in the way that it is today. And in that moment, I just decided that something needed to be done. It was important for me as a mother that I could find a visual representation of my daughter so that she would feel she was enough. She didn't need to aspire to an ideal that she couldn't. And I knew that if I felt that, there would be other people who felt that. So intuitively, I just knew this was something that I needed to, step into. And that process of, having that thought of, oh, why don't you do it? Changed my life and took me on this wonderful entrepreneurial journey, which saw us become, Colourblind Cards become the first independent greeting card publisher to have a secure presence for Black cards in the British High Street. And we went on to secure American and South African distribution And perhaps even more importantly than the presence, or just as importantly, be a big part of opening up that conversation around the importance of representation in a way that was very human, and easy for people to wrap their heads around, to accept, and therefore to challenge the status quo. And I'm very proud of that.
No, and rightly so. And I think the diversity and inclusion conversation that I think is more prominent now, probably not as prominent as it should be in certain quarters, but it is definitely on the agenda. And it is certainly a topic of a lot more conversation and debate and understanding. Whereas back when you decided, that sort of moment in time, that thought process, why don't I do this? I don't think it was as front of the news headlines. We weren't reading about it back then, right?
No, I mean, it was the response, when I let people know what I was doing, whether it was buyers, in the high street, or in media interviews, it was very much like, oh yeah, there aren't any cards that have Asian, mixed, Black people on them. And of course, it just sparks a wider conversation around where else there wasn't representation, and how normalized it was for us to just accept that the families on the TV commercials for the Iceland advert, or the John Lew, whatever it might be, were white and not representative of the beautiful multicultural country that it is today, or was then, and that there was something that needed to shift. So yeah, it was very much an oh yeah, as opposed to yes, we know that there's that there's something that we need to change here.
And how wonderful that you were able to do that, to almost kickstart and help progress that discussion. But tell me a bit about the actual MBE process itself. What was it like? Because I mean, the palace and everything that goes along with that. What was that like, actually receiving the MBE?
It was wonderful. I mean, I took my mom and dad and my daughter Monet, who was about 13, I think, at that point. And it was very special. It was a real sort of fork in the road for, I guess, the journey that I'd been on as a person, from being a very young mum, and working incredibly hard to go back into education, and then forge this career in environments where I often found myself the only sort of state educated young woman, the only woman of color, and that came with its own challenges, but it I have no doubt that it's all there were many gifts that came through that experience of those contrasts. But so yeah, there was the acknowledgement, and also just being able to take my parents, who had worked so hard, with their own, huge amount of challenges that they both came with as individuals. But my dad, particularly, having come to Britain in the Windrush years, at a time where it was no Blacks, no Irish, no dogs, for him to go to the palace, it felt like a real sort of there was a deeper level of significance about that. And it's one of the reasons that where I've been asked about the MBE and the whole British Empire, and whether or not there's been a sense of conflict for me as a woman of color accepting an MBE. It was very simple for me. It was a moment to acknowledge my dad's hard work, to it felt like a reclamation in some way, and a positive indicator of growth and progress in the country, and that for me prevailed, and continues to.
Yeah, and particularly your parents' generation and what they went through. And and then the next moment, the father and the daughter are at the palace. I mean, it is a significant sort of time for reflection, isn't it? And Yeah, I can also understand the questions that have been raised as well, and you have to really consider all aspects of that. But I appreciate you sharing that with us, and it's a wonderful achievement. So congratulations on the MBE, of course. But you're no stranger to fancy addresses, because I know you've also been involved over the years with a number of roundtable discussions at number 10 Downing Street, which is another famous British address, I should say. And, you know, as the official sort of residence, I suppose, of the Prime Minister, and there's been a lot of change recently, both in terms of the monarchy and also in terms of British politics. It's been an interesting year, but being involved in roundtables at number 10 must have been interesting. Could you maybe share a little bit about that too?
It was, I mean, it was a long time ago. It was during those colorblind card years, which is sort of going back to kind of 2000, the late 2000s, and, you know, good sort of at least 10 years ago. But it was yeah, it's a privilege to be able to use my voice to talk about how we can encourage a more enterprising young Britain, and also to be able to share insights which perhaps you know, weren't so widely shared generally in the rooms at number 10, around some of the barriers and obstacles that prevent young people from you know, embarking on an entrepreneurial route, and just to sort of speak some as I said, to sort of give insight and experience around the fact that it's not just you know, in London particularly, there is so much in the way of resource to support young people in making a success of their life, whether through academia, you know, apprenticeships, entrepreneurships. There's so much. There's the work that Prince's Trust do. There's a phenomenal amount, and yet it can't stop at resource, because in my experience, so often it's the, you know, some of the greatest challenges that we can all face, but particularly young people that come from adversity, are internal. And so for us to ignore those, you know, we miss out on nurturing and so much of the talent that is out there. And so it was a great time to be able to represent those voices.
And from those times, and I know it was a number of years ago now, but today's London or today's Britain, do you think that's, you know, we've seen those changes? Do you think it's a completely different landscape now, or how do you feel about it today?
I think we're moving in the right direction. There are friends and connections that I have that are doing incredible work to reach some of the hardest to reach young people, and getting great support, you know, in doing so. So, you know, that's unquestionable. I think there's also a lot more, there's a greater depth of understanding about the barriers, and less of the sort of previous, you know, I think we've come through a time where often particular role models, and I include myself in that, would be held up as, you know, well, this individual and that individual did it, and therefore everyone can do it. And actually, it's just such a limited narrative, which you know, doesn't really speak to the sort of truth of the matter. And also, I think there's a greater acceptance of our collective responsibility, you know, which is a wonderful thing, you know, and less of the perhaps less of the separation. That's my sense. That's my sense, that there is a greater recognition of how, particularly, you know, the different institutions, from education, you know, impact life chances of a young person and going off into the workforce, and how, you know, whether it's unconscious bias on the part of teachers in the classroom, can have an incredibly tragic effect on, talent that never actually, there's so much. And I think we've got a greater understanding today that the conversations that need to be happening in order for us to move forward feel like they began to happen around the time of the pandemic, and particularly the murder of George Floyd. I think it was a real a sort of turning point, a shift. That's my sense.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. And it's interesting. I was just reflecting on what you're saying there in terms of, I suppose, kickstarting the conversation many years ago about, well, here's somebody else who's done it, so you can do it too. It's much more nuanced than that. It's much more complex than that. It's much more layered than that. And you were talking a little bit about, to reach certain segments and to be able to understand whether it's that unconscious bias that's crept in that prevents somebody from realizing their full potential, and the multitude. It's a very complex area to get right. But I think, through people like yourself and the work that you do and have done, and also the people that you mentioned who are really, I think, making a difference and helping to progress the conversations, and hopefully we're reaching more and more people, and hopefully that continues. And I think you covered it right, Jessica, when you said, I think we're moving in the right direction. I think we certainly have direction now, but as with most things, more to do here, right? But look, we've mentioned the MBE. We've mentioned some really nice addresses like Buckingham Palace, like 10 Downing Street. But I also wanted to mention another address, which I'm a little bit fascinated by, and that's that of the British Library. Because as the sort of UK's national library, I think, I was fascinated to read that not only does it provide sort of, the information services that we have for, academics and business and research and scientific communities, but that they have a collection of over 170 million items, and, artifacts from every age of the written civilization, and how the British Library keeps and collects a nation's archive of printed and digital publications. And the bit that really blew me away, and I really was fascinated with, was they add around 3 million new items to the collection every single year. Now, I know in the past you've held workshops at the British Library. I think it's a fabulous address and location, and maybe you have some plans to revisit that in the not too distant future. But what's your experience of the British Library and what you were involved in there?
It's a wonderful place. You wander in and it's just so full of knowledge, and you can sort of feel it in the air. But it's such an accessible, open place too. And you walk in and there are people pursuing their dreams and their business visions and sitting there with their laptops and kind of working freely. They always have really good cake, And my workshops were at the Business and IP Centre. And yes, I'm sure I will, do them again. Helping small business owners to embrace visibility with integrity, with authenticity. And they were really we'd have a blast. It'd be 3 hours of people coming in and from all walks of life and all sectors. And we'd really get to know each other throughout the 3 hours, and they would leave, sort of empowered to go out and step into visibility and share their message and reach more of their audience. So it was really a way of me repurposing, those years of being a publicist and a PR consultant into a manner which felt much more aligned with the person that I was becoming. But they have such incredible support there for people, for business owners. So yeah, whether it's around trademarking or market research, you can go in and spend an afternoon and be supported in finding what you need.
Yeah, well, look, I don't want to run out of time here because I want to ask you something else as well. And you've just sparked something there that I must ask you about. And, speaking of libraries, you are a successful author in your own right. With your book, you're the author of Purpose. And, this is about finding your truth, embracing your calling. I know it was published by Hay House. And as the founder of something also called the Purpose Academy, which I know has a purpose for, how would I say, purpose-driven business owners, would be the way I think it's best described. But you also mentioned about your former career there a little bit. And I just want to sort of ask you about that too, because as a former publicist, people may not know that you were representing, I suppose, socially conscious personalities and entrepreneurs, and within your roles and within your background as this publicist, you represented some of the UK and the USA's best known brands, and that would be people and personalities. That would be people like Samuel L. Jackson, who I'm sure we all know, Simon Cowell, who's big in both sides of the Atlantic, Kelly Rowland, the Duchess of Sussex, Meghan Markle. And so maybe you could share a little bit of information, if you can, about your career as a publicist, and of course about the book Purpose. And maybe that could lead us into, the Purpose Academy, because there's quite a bit there. And I don't want to skip over those, because they're three very interesting elements, the academy, the book, and of course the publicist career that you've had.
So in order, so to start with, it's interesting that you said, I represented socially conscious celebrities, because I don't know that I did at that point. I think, we tend to attract people who align with ourselves, I guess, to a certain degree. And but perhaps it's the elements that of the sort of facets of their being, of their work in the world, that I was most interested in, I tended to bring out, perhaps. I don't know. It's an interesting one. But yeah, no, it was interesting times, I tended to work with these personalities around their not-for-profit work, or their social initiatives, and often just helping them to share more of who they are, and just sort of identifying the sort of messages that would be most useful for their audience. And it's PR, so it's always about promotion. There's no getting away from that. It's always about raising a profile or creating visibility and media coverage. But I think even then, which was before I wrote Purpose and before I had this real kind of shift into what have become my purpose years, I think even then there was a sort of natural inclination to want to draw out the good and share that in service to, humanity, to to people who are, in recognition of how powerful celebrity is, how much influence they have. So I think that's something that I did very naturally. But that was, again, a few years back, so sort of pre Prince Harry, certainly.
Yeah, but it's interesting that you say, because sort of those social elements, or those sort of non-profit charitable community type aspects to each person that we mentioned there, there's also a personal brand wrapped up in that, isn't there? And each one of those people that we mentioned, and others, internationally known. So making sure that story is right, that it's correct, that it reflects well, that it's accurate, and that it's also aligned with that person's sort of personal beliefs and your own. That's not easy. It sounds very glitzy and glamorous, but I think it's probably a lot more complex than people imagine, because it is PR at the end of the day, isn't it? But tell me all about the book, because I want to know about the book, because I think it's fabulous that you've published this. I mentioned by Hay House. So tell me about the book. How did that come about, and what's the story behind that?
So the book was another accident or, synchronicity. I wasn't intending on writing a book, but it emerged in 2016 for the first time, I think. So I had stopped to care for my dad, who had been diagnosed with terminal cancer, and I, at that point, I was a complete workaholic. I was juggling 2 businesses, colorblind cards, JHPR, my PR agency, and working all the hours. And I had been doing that consistently for 15 years. Very much defined by my career, by my awards, by my doing. I was defined by my doing and what I did for a living. And I think often the challenge with that is the more that you're celebrated for something, as I was, which is a wonderful thing, because I had overcome so many hurdles as this young mum, to create that career. In some ways, I think the celebration just went some way to perpetuate the feeling that who, or the question of who am I without that stuff, and so you just keep doing on this hamster wheel. And so, 2016, I stopped for the first time to care for my dad, and it was a life-changing period of presence and reconnection to what's real, when suddenly those awards and title on the business card and celebrity clients and all of the stuff is shown up for what it is, which is just a fun way to spend a life, actually. But it's not, when it comes to birth and death, it really is only love and connection and that matter. And so grief was a very powerful, as I cared for my dad, with his lung cancer, and as it sort of spread to the rest of his body, it was just a return to what is real. And during that time, I picked up a pen and started to write on the back of an envelope, 3 o'clock in the morning, 3 days before my dad passed on. By that point, he was in this kind of coma state, medicated. This stream of consciousness sort of hit the page, and that evolved into the book Purpose, which was really me redefining success for myself, sharing my journey. And it was the beginning of a journey back to myself, really, a journey of letting my heart sort of lead my life rather than my head, and getting in touch with who I was, what was really important to me, rather than what I should be doing, and trying to fit into some kind of external validation.
Yeah, thanks very much for sharing that. It sounded like the book had to be written, and you just sort of poured onto the pages by all accounts. And so the Purpose Academy then was the final bit. So that sort of led on to more things, hasn't it, with an academy now? So what's the academy? What's the Purpose Academy all about?
Yeah, so I think, that process of that I just kind of shared a little bit of writing the book and that journey that I began, it has been it changed my career, it changed my life, it had me question all of my choices and, look at where they weren't aligned with, how I want to live my life and, who I feel I'm here to be. And so it just led me to evolve. And I guess the Purpose Academy is a culmination of all of that experience as a publicist and a PR consultant, repurposed into a vehicle which is much more aligned with who I am today and what I believe in, which is that visibility is a very powerful tool for sharing a message, for expanding, amplifying reach, and doing great work in the world, reaching people. And so the people that come to the Purpose Academy are all, I guess, of that same belief system. And they are the people who are challenging in the best way, the way we've been doing things in a variety of different industries, and presenting solutions for a way forward which places equity and placing the person and the well-being of people at the heart of their work. And I love it. Yeah, it's great.
It sounds wonderful. You mentioned something earlier, which I'm certainly going to use from here, which is, you said, now in my purpose years. I love that. I love that turn of phrase. But look, wonderful. And it not that it's full circle, maybe that's the wrong term, but it's interesting, isn't it, that after all the success and all the things that we've spoken about, it comes back to, doesn't it, that human connection, what's important, what is actually the purpose. And it's interesting. I wanted to ask you, though, before we wrap up today, is there anything else that you'd like to share with our audience, Jessica? Is there anything that we haven't touched on that you'd like to maybe share today?
Not really. I think if it resonates, you should read the book.
Very good. Yeah.
No, not really. I think it's been a lovely chat. I think we covered a lot.
We certainly have. And if people want to find you or get in touch or find you online, where's the best place for them to go, Jessica? How do they find you?
My website is jessicahuie.com. And I'm sort of active on LinkedIn and Instagram particularly. And failing that, they are very welcome to come to the Purpose Retreat in Jamaica, which is January 9th to the 16th, next 2023.
That sounds wonderful. Well, look, Jessica, that's going to be the end of today's show. It's been an absolute pleasure to catch up with Jessica Huie today. Please make sure that you all tune in again to see and or listen to the next VistaTalks show, where once again we'll be discussing some interesting topics with interesting people from all around the world. Thank you so much, Jessica.
Thanks for having me, Simon.